My wife said she'd frame me for assault after I discovered her affair. Who do you think they'll believe? She smirked. A cheating husband or an innocent victim? I didn't argue. I didn't panic. I just stayed quiet and installed cameras throughout the house. 3 weeks later, she tried to stage the whole thing, but forgot about the kitchen camera. I didn't confront her. I just handed the footage to my lawyer. In court, her face went white when they played the video of her rehearsing her lies. I got everything: the house, custody, and her reputation destroyed. Now she's begging for a settlement. I should have seen it coming. Looking back, all the signs were there. Jess had been distant for months, always on her phone, working late more often than usual. She'd started dressing differently, buying new clothes that she claimed were for confidence at work. The intimacy between us had died completely, but whenever I tried to talk about it, she'd brush me off or start an argument about something completely unrelated. The night I found out, I wasn't even looking for evidence. I'd come home early from a business trip because my meetings got cancelled, and I wanted to surprise her. Instead, I got the surprise of my life when I walked into our bedroom and found her with Vladimir, a guy from her yoga studio. They were so caught up in what they were doing that they didn't even hear me come in. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 seconds. Then I quietly backed out of the room, grabbed my keys, and drove to a nearby coffee shop to think. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my cup. When I finally came home that evening, acting like nothing had happened, Jess was making dinner as if it was any other Tuesday. She even asked how my trip went. The audacity was breathtaking. I waited 3 days before saying anything. I needed time to process what I'd seen and figure out how to handle it. During those 3 days, I watched her lie to my face repeatedly. She told me she loved me, asked about my day, even suggested we plan a weekend getaway. Each lie felt like a knife twisting deeper. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until we were having dinner, and then I simply said, "I know about Vladimir." The fork dropped from her hand and clattered against her plate. For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by something cold and calculating. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I came home early on Tuesday. I saw you two in our bedroom." The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. I expected tears, apologies, maybe even relief that the secret was finally out. What I got instead was something I never could have prepared for. Jess slowly put down her napkin, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "So what are you going to do about it?" Her tone was challenging, almost daring. This wasn't the woman I'd married 8 years ago. This wasn't the woman who used to cry during sad movies and leave little love notes in my lunch bag. "I think we need to talk about divorce," I said quietly. That's when she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You really think it's going to be that simple?" What happened next still gives me chills. Jess leaned back in her chair and studied me like I was some kind of interesting specimen. Then she began to speak in a voice so calm and matter-of-fact that it was terrifying. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "If you try to divorce me, if you try to take anything that's mine, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to tell everyone that you've been hitting me. I've got photos ready to go. Makeup can work wonders, you know. I've been documenting your abuse for months." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "Jess, that's insane. I've never laid a hand on you. I never would." "Doesn't matter," she shrugged. "I've got bruises, I've got pictures, I've got a whole timeline worked out. I've even practiced crying on command. Want to see?" And then she did it. Right there at our dinner table, she began to sob. Real tears, shaking shoulders, the whole performance. After about 30 seconds, she stopped abruptly and smiled at me. "Pretty good, right? I've been taking acting classes. Vladimir thinks I'm really talented." The casual mention of her lover's name in the middle of her threat felt like another slap. But it was what she said next that really knocked the wind out of me. "Who do you think they'll believe?" she asked, tilting her head. "A cheating husband who's angry about being caught, or an innocent victim who's finally brave enough to speak up? I've got friends who will testify that they've suspected something for months. I've got that bruise on my arm from when I walked into the door last week, but in my version, you grabbed me. I've got it all figured out." I sat there in stunned silence. This woman, who I'd shared nearly a decade of my life with, was calmly explaining how she planned to frame me for domestic violence. She was enjoying it. There was something almost gleeful in her eyes as she laid out her scheme. "So here's the deal," she continued. "You're going to keep your mouth shut about Vladimir. We're going to stay married, and you're going to pretend to be happy. You can sleep in the guest room if you want, I don't really care. But if you try to leave me, if you try to take half of what we've built, I will ruin you. Your career, your reputation, your freedom. Everything." She stood up and started clearing the dishes as if we just discussed weekend plans. "Oh, and I'll be moving Vladimir in next month. He's having some financial troubles, and I think it would be nice if we helped him out. You don't mind, do you?" I wish I could say I stood up to her in that moment. I wish I could say I called her bluff and told her to do her worst. But the truth is, I was terrified. Jess had always been smart, but this level of calculation and cruelty was something I'd never seen from her before. That night, I lay awake in our bed. She'd gone to help Vladimir move some things, and tried to figure out what to do. The logical part of my brain knew that her plan had holes. But the terrified part kept thinking about how often men are assumed guilty in domestic violence cases, especially when their wives seem so credible and sympathetic. I thought about calling a lawyer, but what would I say? My wife is threatening to frame me for assault, but she hasn't actually done it yet? I thought about recording our conversations, but that felt like something out of a spy movie, not real life. For the next week, I went through the motions of normal life while my world crumbled around me. Jess continued her affair openly, sometimes not even coming home until the next morning. When I asked where she'd been, she'd smile and say, "With Vladimir." Problem? The worst part was how she seemed to be enjoying my misery. She'd make little comments throughout the day, subtle reminders of the power she held over me. "Oh, I bumped into your coworker Janet at the store today. Such a nice woman. I'd hate for her to hear any unfortunate rumors about you." Or, "I was so clumsy today, walked right into the corner of Vladimir's coffee table. Left quite a mark. Good thing we trust each other, right?" The idea came to me on a Thursday morning while I was getting ready for work. Jess was in the shower, singing cheerfully, probably thinking about her plans with Vladimir later. I was brushing my teeth when I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. That's when it hit me. If Jess was planning to stage evidence against me, there was only one way to protect myself: document everything. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching home security systems. By evening, I had a plan. Not just cameras, though those would be crucial, but a comprehensive system to protect myself and gather evidence of what was really happening in my own home. The tricky part was installing everything without Jess noticing. She was spending most of her time with Vladimir, but she still came home regularly, and I needed to be careful. I started with the most important areas, the main living spaces where any alleged assault would likely take place. I bought a professional-grade system with cameras that looked like everyday objects: a smoke detector in the living room, a digital clock in the kitchen, a phone charger in the hallway. The cameras were wireless and stored footage directly to a cloud service under an account Jess didn't know about. I even set up a separate secure Wi-Fi network just for the cameras, hidden from our main network. The whole process took me 3 days, working in small increments when Jess was out. I was paranoid about every detail, testing angles and making sure the cameras were completely invisible. I documented everything I did, including timestamps and locations, knowing I'd need to prove the chain of custody if this ever went to court. The hardest part was acting normal around Jess while I was setting up my surveillance system. She was still making her little threats and comments, still flaunting her relationship with Vladimir. But now, instead of feeling helpless, I felt like I was taking back some control. Once everything was installed, all I could do was wait. And document. I started keeping detailed notes of Jess's behavior, her threats, her absences. I saved every text message, every voicemail. I was building a case, even though I wasn't sure yet how I'd use it. Jess, meanwhile, seemed to be escalating things. Vladimir started coming over for dinner regularly, acting like he owned the place. Jess would hold his hand right in front of me. She wanted me to react, to give her the excuse she needed to put her plan into motion. But I didn't react. I stayed calm, stayed quiet, and let my cameras record everything. 1 week after installing the system, Jess came home one evening with a new bruise on her cheek. She made sure I saw it, even pointing to it when she said goodnight. Walked into a door at work, she said with a smirk. So clumsy of me. The next day, I caught her on the kitchen camera practicing her emotional breakdown again, timing herself, even looking up acting techniques on her phone. What she didn't realize was that this camera, disguised as a digital clock, had been recording everything she'd been doing in the kitchen for the past week. I knew she was getting ready to make her move. It happened on a Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks after I discovered the affair and 1 week after installing the cameras. I was in the living room, reading, when Jess came in and started an argument about something trivial. I think it was about leaving dishes in the sink. But this wasn't like our usual arguments. Jess was louder than normal, more dramatic. She kept positioning herself in different spots around the room, and I realized she was making sure she'd be visible from multiple angles for whatever she had planned. "You never listen to me," she shouted, though we'd been having a fairly normal conversation just moments before. "You never respect me." I tried to de-escalate, speaking in a calm, quiet voice. "Jess, I'm not sure what you're upset about. Can we talk about this rationally? Don't patronize me," she screamed. Then, in a move that was so sudden and unexpected that I almost didn't process it, she slapped herself hard across the face. The sound echoed through the room. For a moment, we both just stared at each other. Then Jess began to cry, not the practice performance from dinner weeks ago, but real tears of pain from the slap she'd just given herself. "How could you hit me?" she sobbed, loud enough that the neighbors might hear. "How could you hurt me like that?" I was so shocked that I couldn't even respond at first. I just sat there, watching my wife of 8 years frame me for assault in real time. "Jess," I said quietly, "you just hit yourself. I didn't touch you." "Liar," she screamed. You hit me. You've been hitting me for months. She continued the performance for another few minutes, alternating between sobs and accusations. Then, as abruptly as it had started, she stopped. I'm going to call the police, she said in a voice that was suddenly calm and cold. I'm going to tell them what you've been doing to me. What you just did to me. I looked at her calmly and said, okay. My response seemed to catch her off guard. She'd expected me to panic, to beg, to try to stop her. Instead, I just sat there with a slight smile on my face. Okay? She repeated, confused. Yes, I said. Call them. I think that's a great idea. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw uncertainty in Jess's eyes. But it was too late for her to back down now. She'd committed to her performance, and she had to see it through. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Jess met them at the door, her face still red from the slap she'd given herself, tears still fresh on her cheeks. She was the picture of a terrified, abused wife. I watched from the living room as she gave her statement. She was good, really good. She told them about months of escalating abuse, about how I'd become violent and controlling since losing my temper more often at work. She showed them the bruise on her cheek, the one on her arm from the previous week. She even mentioned the bruises she'd photographed earlier, saying she'd been too scared to report them before. When it was my turn to give my statement, I was calm and cooperative. I denied hitting her, of course, but I didn't try to explain what had really happened. I didn't mention the cameras. I just told them that there had been some marital problems, but I had never been violent. The officers were professional but clearly skeptical of my story. Who could blame them? Jess was a compelling victim, articulate, emotional, with visible injuries. I was the husband with no witnesses and no proof of my innocence. They asked if I had anywhere else I could stay for the night. I said I did. My brother Mike lived across town and had offered his guest room when I'd called him earlier that week about having marriage troubles. They strongly suggested I take some time away from the house to let things cool down. As I packed a bag, Jess watched me with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. Her plan was working perfectly. Or so she thought. I stayed at Mike's house for 3 days. During that time, Jess filed for a restraining order and began the process of filing for divorce. She also started telling everyone who would listen about my abuse, calling my family, her family, our mutual friends. She posted subtle messages on social media about finding strength in difficult times and breaking cycles of pain. My phone was buzzing constantly with concerned calls and messages. Some people wanted to hear my side of the story, but others had already made up their minds. Jess had always been more social than me, better at maintaining relationships. People liked her, trusted her. On the 4th day, I met with a lawyer. Steve Brigitte was a family attorney who specialized in difficult divorce cases. Mike had recommended him after doing some research. Steve was honest with me about the challenges we'd be facing. Domestic violence allegations are serious, he said. Even if the criminal charges don't stick, they can still impact the divorce proceedings significantly. Do you have any evidence that might support your version of events? That's when I smiled for the first time in days. Actually, I said, I do. I showed him the footage from my hidden cameras, along with all the documentation I'd kept. All of it. Jess's affair with Vladimir in our home. Her threats to frame me. Her practicing her victim routine in front of the mirror when she thought no one was watching. And, most importantly, the footage from that Tuesday night. The living room camera had captured everything. Jess starting the argument, escalating it for no reason, positioning herself dramatically around the room. And then, in crystal clear high definition, her slapping herself across the face while I sat motionless on the couch 10 feet away. Steve watched the footage twice, his expression growing more amazed with each viewing. This is... He started, then shook his head. I've never seen anything quite like this. She really planned the whole thing out. There's more, I said, and showed him the kitchen camera footage from the days before the incident. Jess could be seen practicing her emotional breakdown, timing how long she could cry on command, even researching domestic violence statistics and how to document abuse on her laptop. She had been thorough in planning her frame-up, but she'd made one crucial mistake. The kitchen camera, disguised as a simple digital clock that had been there for months, had recorded hours of her preparations. She'd become so comfortable in what she thought was her private space that she'd forgotten it was there. We need to preserve this evidence properly, Steve said. I'm going to have a digital forensics expert verify the authenticity and create certified copies. Then we're going to use this to destroy her case. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. Jess felt confident. After all, she had photographs, witness statements from friends who said they'd suspected something, and her own compelling testimony. She probably thought it would be a formality. I arrived at the courthouse with Steve and a certified forensics report along with the preserved video evidence. Jess was there with her lawyer, a woman named Diana who had a reputation for being aggressive in domestic violence cases. Jess looked surprised to see me with quality representation. In her version of events, I was supposed to be panicking, desperate, maybe even considering fleeing. Instead, I looked calm and prepared. The hearing began with Jess's lawyer presenting their case. Diana was good at her job, painting me as a controlling, violent husband who had finally escalated to physical abuse. Jess took the stand and gave an Oscar-worthy performance, complete with tears and shaking hands as she described the assault. She was so convincing that I saw a few people in the gallery, including some of my own family members who had come to support me, looking conflicted and concerned. Then it was our turn. Steve stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, before we present our defense, I'd like to submit some video evidence that I believe will be directly relevant to these proceedings. This evidence was obtained legally from my client's own home security system and has been authenticated by a certified digital forensics expert. Jess's lawyer objected, claiming they hadn't been given adequate notice about video evidence. But Steve had properly filed all motions and provided the required documentation. The judge reviewed the forensics report and allowed the evidence. What happened next was like something out of a movie. The courtroom had a large screen for displaying evidence, and suddenly everyone was watching crystal clear footage of Jess slapping herself while I sat peacefully across the room. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as the judge, the lawyers, the gallery, and Jess herself watched her elaborate fraud play out in high definition. But Steve wasn't done. He played more footage, Jess practicing her breakdown in the kitchen, her researching how to fake domestic violence evidence, her calls with Vladimir where she discussed timing the incident for maximum impact. Hours of footage that showed the calculated, methodical way she had planned to destroy my life. I watched Jess's face throughout the presentation. The confidence drained away first, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror as she realized the extent of what had been captured on camera. By the end, she was white as a sheet, gripping the edge of the witness stand so hard her knuckles had gone completely pale. Her lawyer, Diana, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She kept shuffling through papers, looking for something, anything, that might salvage the situation. But there was nothing. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The judge was not pleased. Judge Martinez had been presiding over family court for 15 years, and she'd seen a lot of ugly cases. But deliberate fraud of this magnitude was something else entirely. Ms. Caldwell, she said, her voice cold and formal, using Jess's maiden name, I have been practicing law for over 20 years, and I have never seen such a calculated and malicious attempt to manipulate the legal system. What you have done here is not just an attack on your husband, but on every genuine victim of domestic violence who deserves to be believed and protected. Jess tried to respond, but the judge held up her hand for silence. The restraining order petition is denied, Judge Martinez continued. Furthermore, I am ordering that copies of this evidence be forwarded to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. You have potentially committed perjury, filed false police reports, and attempted to perpetrate fraud upon this court. The judge then turned to me. Mr. Thompson, I apologize that you had to endure this ordeal. However, I commend you for having the foresight to protect yourself and for handling this situation with appropriate legal counsel. As we left the courthouse, Jess tried to approach me. We can work this out, she said desperately. We don't have to let this destroy everything. I looked at her calmly and said the same thing she'd said to me weeks earlier, so what are you going to do about it? The district attorney's office took their time reviewing the case, but eventually criminal charges were filed. Jess was charged with filing false police reports and perjury 3 months after the civil hearing. The case didn't make national news, but it was covered by our local paper, which led to some uncomfortable conversations in our social circle. Her employer, a marketing firm, didn't immediately terminate her but quietly let her go during their next round of budget cuts. Many of her friends distanced themselves once they learned the truth, though some remained loyal, believing her claims that she'd been manipulated by Vladimir. Vladimir, meanwhile, had disappeared shortly after the courthouse hearing. It turned out he had been feeding information about my finances to Jess, hoping they could maximize what she'd get in the divorce and that he'd benefit from her windfall. When it became clear that plan had backfired spectacularly, he'd moved back to his home state. The police had enough evidence to charge him too, but it wasn't worth the cost of extradition for what would likely be a minor sentence. The divorce proceedings moved forward rapidly. With the criminal case pending and the video evidence making headlines in our legal community, Jess's credibility was completely destroyed. Her attempts to claim half of our assets fell apart when it became clear she'd been planning to defraud the court system. Steve was thorough in the negotiations. Your client attempted to send my client to prison for a crime that never happened, he told Jess's new lawyer. Diana had withdrawn from the case citing irreconcilable differences. She planned to destroy his life, his career, and his freedom. Any settlement offer needs to reflect the gravity of what she attempted to do. Jess's third lawyer approached us 4 months after the courthouse revelation. The criminal case was moving forward, her reputation was in tatters, and she was drowning in legal fees from multiple attorneys. My client would like to discuss a settlement, the lawyer said. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had threatened to take everything from me was now begging for mercy. In the end, I got the house, the vast majority of our joint assets, and Jess agreed to pay my legal fees. She also signed a comprehensive settlement agreement that included admissions about her fraudulent behavior and a clause preventing her from making any future claims against me. But more than the money or the property, what I really got was my life back. My reputation was not only restored but enhanced among those who knew the full story, I was seen as someone who had handled an impossible situation with intelligence and restraint. The friends and family members who had initially been uncertain were embarrassed by their doubt and went out of their way to show their support. Jess, on the other hand, faced consequences on multiple fronts. She eventually pled guilty to reduced charges and received 6 months in jail plus probation and community service. She also had to pay restitution for the police resources wasted on her false reports. After her release, she moved to another state, claiming she needed a fresh start. It's been 18 months since the divorce was finalized. I sold the house, too many bad memories, and bought a smaller place across town. Mike helped me move and has been a great support throughout this whole ordeal. I've started dating again, though I'm naturally more cautious now. The most surprising thing has been how the experience changed my perspective on relationships and trust. I've connected with a support group for people who've faced false accusations, and I've learned I'm not alone in this experience. While my case was extreme, the underlying dynamics of manipulation and threats are more common than I'd realized. I still have a security system in my new house, though it's mainly for standard home protection now. The cameras are visible deterrents rather than hidden surveillance tools. People often ask me if I'm angry about what Jess put me through. The honest answer is that I went through stages: shock, fear, anger, and eventually a kind of sad acceptance. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm certainly wiser. The Jess I married would never have done something so cruel and calculating, but people can change in ways we never expect. I also feel grateful that I handled it the right way. If I had reacted emotionally, if I had confronted her without evidence, if I had tried to fight her accusations with just my word against hers, things could have gone very differently. Vladimir never faced any real consequences beyond having to leave town quietly. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, he'd moved on to another relationship and was telling people that he'd been the victim of a crazy ex situation. Some patterns never change. If there's anything I want people to take away from this story, it's this: if someone is threatening you with false accusations, document everything legally and get professional help immediately. Don't try to handle it alone, and don't assume that truth will automatically prevail without evidence. I also learned the importance of staying calm under pressure. Every instinct told me to confront Jess immediately when she made her threats, to try to reason with her, to make her see how wrong she was. But my rational mind knew that would only give her the reaction she wanted and the excuse she needed to move forward with her plan. Sometimes the best response to a threat is patience and preparation. I received one letter from Jess after her release, full of apologies and explanations about how Vladimir had manipulated her into the scheme. She claimed she wanted to make amends and asked if we could talk. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But I don't wish her ill, I just want to move forward with my life. I'm doing well now. Better than well, actually. I have a job I enjoy, I'm in a healthy relationship with someone who appreciates honesty and communication, and I've learned to trust my instincts again. It's been a long journey, but I'm optimistic about the future. The house is peaceful these days. No more walking on eggshells, no more wondering what mood someone will be in when they get home, no more lies or manipulation or threats. Just honest, straightforward living. Sometimes I think about that night when Jess laid out her plan to destroy me, how confident she was that she held all the power. Who do you think they'll believe? She had asked with such certainty. Well, Jess, it turns out they believe the evidence. And the evidence, as it happens, was captured in high definition and properly preserved for legal proceedings. I'm finally free, and I'm never looking back.